Annafi Wahed. Thank you so much for joining us on Transcending Politics. How are you doing today?
Hi. Good. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, well, totally, totally. I know that this is pretty much, small potatoes for a big time cable news pundit like yourself. Seems like every time I turn on Fox and Friends, I see my good friend Annafi, which by the way is really exciting actually, because you're longtime friends with my colleague Kieran O'Connor over at Better Angels. And Kieran will frequently shoot me a message. And he'll say saying something like, "Hey, Annafi, on Fox or on cable news again." I'm like, God, I've got to get me some of that Annafi exposure. Some of that Annafi coverage. She's making it up the big time. But
It's
then,
been fascinating.
well, I'm actually curious to know about the reaction that you've gotten maybe from some of your friends and peer group and so forth about your appearances on Fox, and we can talk a little bit about that later if you like. But to begin with, obviously I know a little bit about your background. You are the founder of The Flip Side at theflipside.io, correct?
Yeah, you got
Right.
that.
It's
Nicely
important
done.
to get that domain name get that domain name right.
Yep.
Um, and It's a great publication. I was looking through it a bit earlier, and it's really relatively simple what you guys do, but it's very needed, and that is that you guys take stories on whatever the news of the day may be, and whereas other outlets are going to feed you information through the typical partisan filter, you lay out stories side by side in a way that allows people to see in one viewing just what the two ends of the conversation are talking about. And when you're consuming the news in that way, it's sort of impossible to remain trapped in your bubble, in your informational bubble. But for those folks watching us here who don't know your story, why don't you go back over it really quick and tell us just who you are prior to that and what led you to found the Flip Side.
Sure. So my story is kind of wacky. After college, I spent 4 years working in finance. I'm a CFA, and it was the summer of 2016. I was having what many call a quarter life crisis. Didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And I'm sitting with my best friend who jokingly says, "Hey, why don't you go work for the Hillary campaign?" And 2 weeks later, I did just that. And it was actually an intellectual curiosity. I'm a first-generation immigrant. I had grown up in New York City since I was 8 years old. I went to Bryn Mawr College, which is a very progressive liberal arts college. So summer of 2016, even the few Republicans I knew were all voting for Hillary, and I had never actually met a Trump supporter. And so I packed my bags, quit my job at Ernst & Young, went up to New Hampshire to knock on doors for the next 4 months of the 2016 election cycle. I met conservatives and moderates and independents, Bernie bros, and it was an amazing experience. And I think after the election, all of us generally had that same realization, which is media bubbles and echo chambers are not good. Nobody saw the Trump presidency coming, certainly not the left. And what I didn't see were actual solutions for the average person. The average person that's not already a news junkie, that doesn't have the time or desire or attention span to read 20 op-eds a day. And so I love what you said. It's, what you guys do is so simple. On the one hand, yes, the idea itself is very simple, right? We read op-eds from the left, the right, the center, the far right, the far left, and we select the best quotes and we spice them together into a coherent narrative and a 5-minute digest each morning. On the other hand, it's so complex because on any given topic, you have 20 op-eds. So how do you select the 3 or 4 best articles? And then once you select those articles, how do you pick the 3 or 4 best quotes to sort of work together to create a coherent narrative? We spend a lot of time, agonizing. Should we include the Wall Street Journal or the National Review? Should we include the Atlantic or the Vox today? Which argument do we think is most compelling to the other side? And my team is politically diverse, and it's always, fun at 3 a.m. to be, on the Google Docs, screaming at each other. It's a lot of fun, and our readers are amazing, and we've just been growing organically because the average person does want to burst their media bubble, but they don't have a way to do that in a digestible way. So we try to make it as digestible as possible, keep it to 5 minutes each morning. Here's 1 or 2 topics. Here's what the left is saying. Here's what the right is saying. And then you can go about your day.
Well, one thing that this is a little bit of just a curiosity, but I noticed that the icon that you have is a bear
Mm-hmm.
on the Flipside website. And I was wondering, is there a particular story to that exactly? Not an elephant, not a donkey, not a weird hybrid.
Sure. Right, right. So we were looking for something that was between a donkey and an elephant.
Okay.
And we feel like the bear has multiple connotations, right? A bear could be a grizzly bear out to eat you, or it could be a cute polar bear or the hibernating bear. Um, some people will say, oh, Russia, bear, or oh, that bear looks like Donald Trump, or oh, bear, do you mean, the stock market, bulls versus bears? So I feel like people come to it with their own connotations and their own preconceptions. The first 2 weeks, it was February 2017, my best friend and I were just spitballing. And we were trying to come up with a name. So before we were called the Flip Side, we were actually called the Roaring Bear
No.
for a few weeks. We don't know why. We counted to three. I think I said roar, she said bear. So we said roaring bear it is. And our tagline was off the beaten path on the hunt for opposing views.
Mm.
And then we rebranded when we realized that, oh, this is a serious thing. People actually really want to read this.
Mm.
So that's where it all comes from. But really, there's no rhyme or reason. We're just being
Well, next time I see a grizzly bear in a TV show on a picture, I'm immediately going to think balanced news. That's what bears mean to me now.
That's what bears. Excellent. That's what we're going for.
Thank you very much, Annafi. Now, you've been on an interesting sort of journey. So, I think that it would be fair to say that you're certainly, all in all, a liberal-leaning person. And
Yes.
you didn't grow up, as you mentioned, I mean, your background originally was not one that was filled with conservative influences. But over the course of your experience with the Hillary Clinton campaign and now in your journalistic capacity and in your media appearances and so forth, you're clearly having a fair amount of exposure to conservatives. What is it that is it something in your own particular disposition that you can point to that has made it a little bit easier for you to find a little bit of empathy with folks on the right side of the aisle? Because you clearly probably have some political disagreements, and for people on the right and the left, there's a difficulty when it
Absolutely.
comes to relating to the other side.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What's enabled you to be able to do that just temperamentally, I guess?
I think I've always been very analytical. And when I read an article or see a problem for the first time, I like to dissect it and I like to look at all the sides. It's almost like putting together a puzzle. And what I realized during my time working for the Hillary campaign is how siloed my information was, where I was just reading CNN and New York Times. Oh, more people have access to healthcare. The stock market's up. Everything is great. President Obama is great. I still love President Obama, but I am now much more aware of all of the faults and shortcomings of his administration now. And really, I just wasn't being exposed to the other side, to the flip side, for lack of a better term.
Right.
And so when I actually started to say, oh, maybe I should look into this, I found some really good ideas. And, fundamentally, right, after the Trump presidency was announced, I think a lot of people on the left, it was a coping mechanism almost. Oh, all of these people who voted for Trump are either explicitly or condoning racism, sexism, xenophobia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And logically speaking, 63 million people in this country can't be those things. You look at the data, you see that over 200, I think it's 206 counties across the nation voted for President Barack Obama twice and then voted for Donald Trump. So it can't just be about race. Logically speaking, there are lots of discrepancies in the left's theory that, oh, half the country has suddenly lost its mind. And you know what? Even if that's true, why did they lose their minds, right? Like, that's what I wanted to find out. And so I was a financial analyst for 4 years, very numbers oriented, very logical. And I think taking that to politics, to media, when I'm, reading articles, I think that helps. Because I tend to be a dispassionate person when I'm trying to figure something out. At the same time, my co-editor, Jahan, is a staunch conservative. Like I said, our team spans the political spectrum, and it's hard. It's hard to keep your cool when I'm looking at pictures of children in cages, or they're looking at what have you. And I think the best thing that I can offer is just to give people the benefit of the doubt. And that's the philosophy that I try. Okay, you're coming at it from a different perspective. Maybe you said something that I find distasteful, but rather than just yell at you about it, I'm going to first find out where that comment came from, and then, oh, how can I dissect it? Why is it that I find it problematic and you don't? Maybe your perception of the word is different from mine, right? For example, the left uses the term undocumented and the right uses the term illegal.
Right.
Right? Just all of those little things. And it's been an amazing journey. Thankfully, Jahan, my co-editor, is significantly smarter than I am. I'm just a pretty face.
Right.
And he's incredibly patient. Yeah, he's incredibly patient in sort of explaining the conservative perspective. And I try to be patient with him in explaining the liberal perspective. And I think it's really about trust and giving people the space to be not PC, the space to say the wrong thing and not jump down their throat.
Yeah, well, I relate to a lot of that. First of all, that's Kieran in my relationship. He's the brain and I'm the looks. That's how that goes. But certainly with in the context of Better Angels, I mean, we are clearly a philosophically and politically diverse team at the core of the organization. Not to mention, of course, all of our volunteers and members throughout the country and so forth. And it's certainly a consistent process of us learning from each other, whether it's the work of putting together, the red and blue workshops across the country where people attend and learn about each other's perspectives, or whether it comes to messaging online through social media. Because, at the same time we're trying to set a space for people to come together and understand one another, we're having to digest all of these controversial political issues as well, And you have to remind yourself sometimes that, hey, you may have a certain personal reaction to something in the news, and that's okay,
Yes,
but
exactly.
But there's a conviction that we share at Better Angels, and I think you share this as well. Over the flip side, it's this idea that says that regardless of how bitterly entrenched our politics become, if we're not able to sort of maintain a basic human level of respect and a desire to humbly sort of achieve understanding from one side to the other, then our social fabric is going to tear apart, and we're not going to be able to build anything on top of it at that point, no matter who's in office, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's a more sort of fundamental and maybe a longer term concern in some sense, and that points me to this thing that I've noticed. It seems to me like a lot of the sort of fault lines are shifting a little bit in the political and social conversation in America. On the one hand, you have this interesting phenomenon. Have you paid any attention to this idea of the intellectual dark web? Are you familiar with? Right. Yeah.
Sam Harris, Ben Shapiro, I think made an appearance. Yeah.
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
And all these folks. And it's a diverse group, but they're all Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying, who I've gotten to know, who are great people gotten to know a bit. And these are all people, whether they're coming from the left or the right, who have been kind of punished in one way or another for stepping outside of their orthodoxy and being willing to oppose their own side for one reason or the other, or to join hands with folks on the other side for issues that are more fundamental than just policy opinions. So it seems like the conversation is shifting in a direction to where maybe because of the flexibility of the internet, our conversations don't always have to be about left versus right. They can be a little bit more nuanced than that.
Absolutely.
And I think that in that same space, you're seeing an actual movement for depolarization start to rise up, whether it's through the work of groups like Better Angels or the Listen First Project, which Pierce Godwin founded, who's been on who was on the show just before you, and Bridging Our Divide, or publications like The Flip Side or All Sides or The Perspective and so forth. And I'm wondering if you're seeing a similar kind of motion here in terms of people looking for, and in many cases creating their own opportunities to step out of their partisan boxes, to have deeper conversations, and maybe even to figure out new ways to organize together. And if you see that too, how do you describe that this kind of new center that's forming in American life?
Well, I think I'm so encouraged by all of these different organizations. And I think we each bring a unique piece of the puzzle, right? So you're doing in-depth workshops where people get together and meet face-to-face and have real in-depth conversations. You have the Listen First Project, which is encouraging people to generally be better people and listen first. You have theflipside.io, which is giving people a digestible way to consume news from both sides in a 5-minute digest each morning. I think it's great that there are all these organizations out there. However, I don't know how strong the push is in terms of getting at the people we really need to reach. Unfortunately, the extremes are winning right now on both sides, right? When you have clickbait, when you have Facebook and Twitter, you have these social media echo chambers. The loudest voices get the most likes, the most sensationalist headlines, get fly to the top. And so I think there are some real questions that need to be addressed about what the future looks like when we're not only geographically separated, but digitally separated. And what the social media companies' responsibilities are, what our own responsibilities are. I think, unfortunately, the last 30 years, we have seen this increasing polarization. I have to be an optimist. That's why I started The Flip Side. Because I think there is a solution to the problem, but I think it's going to take active effort. And I think I was an economics and psychology double major. I know that confirmation biases are very strong, right? People don't want to read the flip side. We get so many angry emails, and we're still a guppy fish, right? So from both sides, right, we're getting about an equal number of angry emails from both sides. So we think we're doing a good job.
Congratulations.
And so I think it's going to be an uphill battle for all of us in all of these organizations. And I think, frankly, it plays to the politicians' desires to keep us polarized. If you don't actually have to compromise and get things done, you can just run on slogans and hashtags. Right now, they don't actually have to come up with policy solutions. They just have to stop the other guy. It's actually an easy sell. So I think we have a lot of hard work ahead of us, but I'm encouraged that there are so many organizations.
Well, right. And I think I'm pretty optimistic. Now, I agree that clearly the status quo with respect to polarization and tribalism and the type of institutional incentives which cause the parties and the big media entities to very frequently pursue divisive agendas that aren't conducive to our actual political and social progress. I mean, clearly those formulas are in action, and they continue to churn on. But I do think that the divisiveness of the moment that we are in and have been in and are perhaps crescendoing towards. I mean, we've got the midterm coming up in 2018.
Yep.
If Congress changes hands, then we'll get to have a fun conversation as to whether or not to impeach the president, and then there will be an actual election in 2020, which will probably field I'm guessing we'll probably field a primary fight within the GOP potentially before it actually gets to a general election. I mean, and who knows what happens on the Democratic side,
And there are plenty of people contemplating a third party run. I think it's going to be a circus.
Yeah, that's right.
Not in a good way, the bad kind of circus.
Right.
For people who do like circuses. I've actually never been to the circus. Anyway.
I've never been to the circus either. No. I'm afraid.
Well, then I shouldn't badmouth it.
Right. I was afraid of clowns growing up. That was probably I was one of those kids. And then when I got older, we actually had those killer clowns who were coming out of nowhere. I don't know.
Oh my God. Yeah. I remember that.
We'll do a different segment on killer clowns. But I agree. I mean, it's things are definitely kind of swinging out of whack in all sorts of directions. In a weird way, that's what makes me optimistic, though, because I think that as things become chaotic, those very circumstances in and of themselves may sort of shake people up, a certain number of people up, to sort of
It's
think to
always darkest before dawn.
exactly. It's always
Yeah.
darkest before the dawn, and that people will sort of look up and think to themselves, well, maybe we should have paid attention to some of the more fundamental issues in terms of the
Sure.
health of our civil society, rather than being so quickly caught up in in the partisan narrative. Given the fact that the partisan narrative is not exactly meant to serve the interests of society
Yeah.
generally, it's meant to enable one side to win a political or tribal battle over the other.
Yeah.
I mean, it literally just comes from that part of our nature, which is emotive and reactionary and tribalistic and so forth. It's not a product of a comprehensive sort of, intellectual and ethical overview of reality, in my opinion, anyway. And so, I mean, it may be true that things will get sort of worse before they get better in some respects, but I do think that they'll get better ultimately. And I think that, I'm certainly optimistic that the work that we're doing here and now,
Absolutely.
may lay the groundwork for that. So, the right and the left are still interesting spaces to sort of look at in their own terms and so forth. And I see there as being some really interesting sorts of points of division on both sides. On the right, it was interesting to see the sort of never Trump movement pick up steam. And, now those people are not sort of in a very influential place within the Republican Party at this.
They certainly are on CNN.
That's true. If you're judging by CNN, that's absolutely the case. There is energy there, though. I mean, I think that, there's a spectrum, I think, that exists from, say, like George Will and David Frum on the one hand, who are, completely, they've completely, defected, at least for to the extent to which they're cashing in all their chips on trying to sort of take Trump down. There's a perspective that runs from them to, say, a guy like Ben Shapiro, who is selectively supportive.
Exactly. Sometimes Trump, as he says.
Yeah, sometimes Trump. Not never Trump, sometimes Trump. And he's judging Trump according to the issues individually and so forth. And,
exactly.
I wouldn't be surprised if Shapiro wound up possibly even voting for Trump for re-election. But the thing that I appreciate about Shapiro is that he's never allowed his selective support of certain policy decisions Trump has made. And by the way, I'm supportive of certain things Trump has done on a policy.
Right. Yeah.
I'm a Republican, and I lean
exactly.
right. Yeah. There's some things individual things he's done I can support. But Shapiro's never allowed that to equal just a wholesale endorsement of like Trump's character and his, difficulty with the truth and his tendency towards being divisive and intellectually, just kind of not there sometimes and so forth. So there's this interesting kind of fight taking place on the right. And then on the left, I think that identity politics has presented an interesting sort of dividing line. Now, I'm kind of funny in and of myself because even though I'm a Republican, I'm certainly sensitive to the issues of inequality and to the issues that minorities and marginalized groups face in this country because it's sort of close to my background. But I do see there as being kind of this question of, well, are we going to rally around sort of the kind of intersection of group identities where we all have sort of like, an agenda that we need to pursue as individual groups on the left? Or are we going to have a more sort of traditional kind of, liberal sort of rhetoric where it says that, hey, we're a multicultural melting pot, we all have a share in the American dream, and this is a country for people of all colors, so on and so forth. Let's have a unifying message. How do you see that playing out on the left as a person who has a background in left-leaning politics? Is that a divide that's going to be pretty difficult for people to see beyond on the left side of the conversation?
I think it's interesting. So I actually grew up in Queens, even though I live in Manhattan now. And I have some friends, I have a lot of friends actually who volunteered for the Ocasio-Cortez campaign. I met her once. She certainly played up the fact that she was a young Latina from the Bronx. At the same time, she was much more than that, right? She was running, in some ways, a very similar campaign to Trump, where she said, look, I am not for the DC swamp. Look at Crowley. He doesn't even live in Queens or Bronx. He doesn't send his kids to school here. His fundraisers cost $2,000 a pop, et cetera, et cetera. She talked about minimum wage. She talked about affordable housing. She talked about campaign finance reform, all of these things that transcend identity politics. So I think just as the Tea Partiers and the Freedom Caucus movement in 2009 was very much incoherent, and just as not all Republicans became Tea Partiers in 2009, I think what we're seeing is the left sort of redefining who they are as a party, as a platform, and still coming to terms with how progressive they want to be. And Ocasio-Cortez acknowledges this, where she says, look, I am running in the Queens and Bronx, and my people feel XYZ. That doesn't mean a Democrat in Nebraska should be running on the same platform.
Right.
I think pluralistic. Oh, good God. This is how you nominate first-generation immigrant.
It's a tough one.
It's a tough one. I think there should be lots of different voices in the room. The far left, the far right, the center left, the center right, the libertarians. I think this is a good thing, actually. What I don't like is that people are attacking her, and people attacked the Tea Partiers and the Freedom Caucus on their, personal shortcomings or other things, right? I think more voices in the room are great. Diverse voices in the room are great. Diverse ideas are great. What I dislike is that just because you don't like someone's politics means you can't like them as a person. That something must be wrong with them, and we must take them down. The left right now is on a smear campaign of Brett Kavanaugh. There are plenty of his policy ideas that we disagree with. We don't need to veer to his personal life.
Right.
Just as there's plenty we disagree with Sarah Sanders and Melania Trump, we don't need to veer to, Barron Trump.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I find problematic. Not that there are different ideas and not all Democrats agree.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say it like that too. What's wrong with us that we can't talk about people on these different ends of the political conversation in a way that allows us to, actually acknowledge the good things about people who we radically disagree with? Like for myself, it is not hard for me to say, okay, so I'm a person, I consider myself to be constitutionally conservative, generally speaking, socially conservative. I mean, I have some nuances, but in general, you sort of put me on the right side of things socially. Certainly a free market oriented individual. I like Ocasio-Cortez. She seems like she's honest. She seems like she's sincere. Right. She seems like she really cares about the people in her district and is going ways.
And Bill O'Reilly and both Bill O'Reilly and Glenn Beck said, look, we disagree with her politically, but she seems honest. She seems like she's trying hard and wants to represent her people. Like, we should applaud that. And I think that's the difference, right? Where we're in a place in our country right now where we can't separate the person from their beliefs. Right. If we want to take down their politics, we have to take them down as people, which, there's...
You know what? Maybe part of the example that people like you and I can set a little bit is to talk about people in a more sort of holistic kind of way so that others can hear. I do feel as if it's easy for people to get so locked into a certain way of speaking because that's just the way that other people speak.
Also, politics has become performative, right? So if I am a liberal, I want to post a status that explains just how liberal I am because that's what's going to get the most likes and the most comments. This hunger we have for constant validation of our feelings. And when you're in an echo chamber, you tend to veer to the extreme of that. Right. I really hate social media.
Well, and it's ironic because clearly we have to be on social media.
Right, exactly. You're simultaneously part of the problem you're trying to address. Don't get me started on the cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, I know. Trying to fix this thing from the inside is really, really a tall order. I'm not sure what other choice we really have, But yeah, I feel a similar way about, say, Cory Booker. I mean, on a policy level, I'm not sure how much we'd agree on. There's certain things like criminal justice reform where I think
yes, bipartisan support.
Right, and he and Rand Paul, I've felt that both of them are pretty good examples of members of the United States Senate who, comparatively speaking, tend to be less polarizing than other folks. Now, having said that, you can find plenty of people on the left and the right who have
disagree with that.
With
sure.
Them. But there have at least been moments where you've seen,
absolutely,
them try. And it's not easy given the institutional and social pressures that surround people, I mean, even for us at the levels we've been at and the work that we've done, I mean, we feel the pull and push to toe the party.
I have already lost friends for the work that I do.
So tell me a little bit about that, because, I know you well enough to know that you are not like a faux liberal or a wolf in sheep's clothing and so forth.
Correct. I am a diehard liberal through and through.
Right. Yeah, that has not changed about you. But you've been, I think, obviously, to your immense credit and so forth. I mean, I'm not, obviously I don't have to be sold, but I think, to your credit, I mean, you've put your finger on this problem, which is that we're not listening to each other, we're not communicating, everything else is suffering because of that. And you've taken the lead in terms of setting an example and reaching out to folks with whom you have political disagreements. Tell me a little bit about what the backlash to that has been like for those people in your life who may have a problem with it.
I mean, so let me start by saying that my close friends have all been incredibly supportive.
That's good.
But it's the people who you thought were once your friends who, I really think the 2016 election had a psychological effect on some people. And so I try not to fault them too much, where they genuinely feel threatened by President Trump. And I disagree with 95% of what President Trump does. Right. At the same time, he is the president of our country and we should want him to succeed. And, I think we have lost faith in our institutions, which is a funny statement to say because I think to a certain extent the right had already lost faith in our institutions for a long time, and now the left is coming to the same realization. So you would think they would be able to come together on that, like, hey, our institutions are broken.
Ronald Reagan was running against the government 38 years ago, right?
Right, exactly. But I'm sitting with a friend. I've been friends with him for years, and we're sitting on a Saturday night and he's making fun of me because I've just been on Fox and Friends. And he says quite seriously, he said, you're a traitor to the cause, right? And I took a step back and I said, what do you mean by the cause? What cause am I, betraying right now? And it just led to a conversation where I didn't see a place where I could turn back that comment. He was so adamant that Trump is a fascist, he's a white nationalist, XYZ misogynist. And let me say that I do think many of Trump's comments are extremely problematic. I don't agree with his rhetoric at all. I do think it's problematic. Yeah. But that's a whole other conversation. But because I was quote unquote legitimizing the right, which is entirely, has a fascist agenda, that I am part of the problem. Right. Which, again, there are 63 million people who voted for Donald Trump. I refuse to believe that all 63 million people have been duped or are somehow, to me, to write off half the country is unacceptable. A functioning democracy requires that you listen to both sides. I had another friend send me an angry email a few days ago. Similar thing. Oh, we're at a constitutional crisis, et cetera, et cetera. And it's one of those moments where how many constitutional crises have we had according to the left, right? We're the party that cried constitutional crisis.
Right. And just like during the Obama administration, I mean, you had folks on the right who everything Obama did was
right.
The fact that the government was this close to kicking down your door and taking your guns, and
exactly. And there's hysteria on both sides.
Never talk to your doctor again either. Right?
Exactly. And I mean, I'm sure if I were a conservative who had a lot of conservative friends, I would probably be getting backlash from conservatives. It's just that my circle happens to be liberal. And so the backlash is coming in that sense. And I think if, my friends who I think of as being open-minded and, in search of the truth and analytical, if my friends are having this reaction, how bad must the problem be in other parts of the country, right? So that's really hard, and it takes a psychological toll. I genuinely didn't think I would have to convince people why the flip side should exist. I thought honestly that my idea was so boring nobody would even care. Who knew it would be so controversial? Who knew there would be people in my personal life who would say I can't support this, and it's been really interesting.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, I can imagine that that's the case. I mean, I grew up in much more of a liberal background and so forth. And so when I became a Republican, and I ran for Congress against Maxine Waters.
Yep.
As you recall. So, I certainly have people.
She's been in the news lately.
Yes, she has. Yes, she has. And I certainly
now it might be a good time to start campaigning.
Oh well, yeah, that was. That's quite an experience. But I certainly had people trying to take my temperature and try to figure out like John, what are you like what are you thinking?
What are you doing? Right.
Racist and so forth.
Also, it's but really tell me how you actually feel. I'm like, no, I actually think we should listen to the other side. They think I'm sort of faking it, or so you're going to get a bunch of readers and then you're going to give them liberal stuff, and I'm like, no, that's not the point.
Well, the funny thing was in my case, so I mean, I definitely got resistance from folks on the left in my life, but then when I started running as a Republican and operating in Republican circles, one of the main things I was telling Republicans is you need to listen to people on the left, because particularly when we're talking about these different groups and so forth, I mean, they have experiences that folks in our party frequently don't have. They have insight into issues that would help round out our understanding.
Valuable. Absolutely.
And even beyond that, I mean, we're all supposed to be, one society at the end of the day.
Exactly.
And, if we're going to create a democratic society, a civil society that's going to flourish long term, I mean, our social bonds have to be strong. And I was very clear about the fact that, big thing that inspired me to really get involved in politics on another level in the first place was Obama's message of hope and change. What I took to be this idea that what we were striving for was not to socialize America, but really to have an America where there wasn't a red America or a blue America, but a United States of America, not a Latino or African American or white or Asian America per se, but a United States of America. And and I would frequently defend Obama as a Republican as I was running that race, and so I would have people come up to me and be like, "You're not really a Republican, right? Like you're guessing you're going to vote for him again, aren't you? Like otherwise, why?"
You have a very narrow path on both sides.
Yeah, right. It's just like
stay the course.
Nuance just
not so much.
Yeah, just slips through people's fingers. But I shouldn't overlook the fact that, I mean, all of these incidents happen, and I could tell funny stories from the campaign trail. I could tell you a story about a coffee clutch I did at a woman's house in the district, who she was a Democrat, and I met her. I knocked on her door, told her who I was, what I was about, and so forth, some of my ideas, and she really liked me. And she said, "I'm going to host a meet and greet for you." And so
that's awesome.
Yeah, so she invited her friends from up and down the street. And they came and they sat in the seats, and I gave my pitch and so forth, and everybody was really sort of, hanging on every word and really into the agenda. And I didn't mention the fact that I was a Republican until like 5 minutes into it,
And suddenly everything changes.
Well, not quite everything, but there's this one guy who was really kind of nodding his head along with everything I was saying and really sort of giving off a supportive vibe. And then when I mentioned that I was a Republican, his face just completely changed, and suddenly like his hand shot up, and like everything he said was an effort to kind of trip me up on one issue or the other, which was totally fine. I mean, I knew my stuff and I answered every question and so forth, and thought I did sort of well. And then by the end of it, I was trying to qualify to get on the ballot at the time. So this, kind of pre-primary part of the campaign. And so I had my signature sheet out and I handed it to the guy. I said, well, I told everybody, I said, well, if I said, I appreciate you guys listening to me, and I've got a vision to help the community. And if you'd like to give me the chance to make my case, all you got to do is sign the sheet to help me get on the ballot. And I handed it to him, and he kind of put up his hands. He was like, I'm sorry, man. He said, I can't. I'm a Democrat. And I said, well, you don't have to be a Republican to sign it. He said, I'm sorry, man. He said, I can't do that. But everybody else in the House did sign it.
That's amazing. Congrats.
Yeah, totally.
That's not easy.
Well, if what I've learned is that if you stick it out long enough, in other words, if you interact with people in good faith long enough without retreating into anger and bitterness yourself, because that just justifies all the anger that people are trying to stick to you, some people will never come around, but many more people will the longer you give them a chance to be able to do so.
Yeah.
And it's really tough when you're like, losing friends and relationships and having people be angry at you. And, a lot of times it hurts because it's like you feel like you're coming from a place of genuine goodwill and you're trying to do a good thing and people want to punish you for it.
I mean, the way I look at it, the flip side has also led to many new friends.
Right.
I went to CPAC this year, and I have several friends I'm still in touch with from CPAC. And obviously my team, we're practically a digital family, always on Slack, on Google Docs. And so, life evolves and you evolve as a person. I have evolved so much where I am, like I said, still a diehard liberal, but I can see the arguments on both sides, and I can sort of dissect the shortcomings of my own arguments. Right. And say, oh, where are the places where we can compromise? Or, I like to say I once was for big government. Now I'm for efficient government. And so it's definitely helped me grow as a person, which is really nice.
Yeah, well, no, that's right. You do find in the course of this kind of work and experience that you lose some people, but you gain other friends, and maybe the people you lost weren't necessarily the best of friends to begin with. Yeah. And if they were, then it doesn't mean that they won't come back around in the future. Yeah. I mean, people, we're fond of saying life is short, but life is kind of long too. It's long enough for certain things to come back around given enough time.
Definitely.
So, yeah. Well, one question I always like to ask people on this show gets to sort of something more fundamental than just the political cause itself. I mean, presumably we're in politics because we want to make a positive difference for society, for humanity, as well as for ourselves and our families and friends on a more local level. But all of that, I think, is sort of an extension of a desire just to do the right thing, to do the good thing, whatever that may be and however it is we see it. And one thing I think we've kind of lost in our larger conversation is a question, just a basic philosophical question of what does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to try and, make the world a better place and so forth? What are the virtues or qualities that go into that? And that's something I think I reflect on a lot. And I'm wondering, what is your perspective on that philosophically? I mean, how do you look at just what it means to be a good person and to be a moral person in your own life and in your own experience?
Wow, that's quite a question. I think
we get deep here. That's my forte.
Real deep. I always think back to Mahatma Gandhi's quote, "Be the change you want to see in the world." Right. Speaking of angry emails from liberals, I once got an email from a fairly important person in the liberal circles who said, he didn't use this word, but that was his connotation. Oh, cute thing you've got going here. But you're putting books back on the bookshelf while we're in the middle of an earthquake. And look, I spent 4 months knocking on doors, making phone calls, not sleeping, living on pizza and stale donuts from Dunkin' Donuts for 4 months in New Hampshire working for Hillary. I was devastated after the election. And I could have gone, back into finance. I could have done 50 different things. But I actually decided to do something positive. We're a small team where we don't have any funding. We're a team of volunteers spending time and effort every day to give the best of both sides to our readers, because I want to be part of the solution. So that's what I always say. It's great that, you have all of these opinions, but what are you actually doing to have an impact on the world? It's not enough to sit in a coffee shop and talk to your friends who you already agree with and, make fun of the other side. Like, oh, those people, blah, they're so uneducated. What are you actually doing to have a positive impact in the world?
Right.
That's what I always think about.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the best I can do right now.
No, well, I mean,
I think about that.
That's not bad. That's not bad at all. I mean, I think that it's a good thing to reflect on it, because I think we get caught up in sort of assuming that, well, the thing that we want to do and that other people are doing must obviously be the right thing. But sometimes I think it's important to sort of stop and think about, like, well, what does right look like? What does good look like? What's the effect that we have on other people?
Exactly.
And, I hope that my legacy and the work that I do will, in part at least, be to sort of influence the way we see and talk and understand issues in a way that makes it easier for us to see the humanity in one another. Because if we see the humanity in one another, it becomes possible for us to be friends again and to be family again.
And it's such a shame that we are taught not to talk about politics in, polite company. Because if you're not talking about it, then how are you coming to a solution? I think we need to relearn how to have difficult conversations. It's not going to be easy, right? There are fundamental disagreements that the two sides have. But how can we do so in a way that actually has a positive impact rather than just makes us feel better, right? I can go on ranting about XYZ and then say, well, I feel better, and walk away and back to my echo chamber. But what impact have I had on the world? Have I actually convinced anyone of anything if I'm just yelling at them? That's what I think about.
Right. Yeah, indeed. Well, Annafi, it's been a pleasure having you on today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah,
it's been really fun.
Yeah, it's an honor to be connected with you. And so for the folks watching, that is Annafi Wahed from theflipside.io. Check out their website. Extremely informative, extremely balanced, and I think a little jewel within the depolarized movement, and something that's going to help us get the work done going forward. So, Annafi, I hope that we can do this again, and I look forward to talking with you about
absolutely.
All sorts of ways we can collaborate in the future. So thank you so much.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks to everyone who's watching.